worked all, well, the majority of them have worked all their lives. They've paid tax, they've paid national insurance all their lives. They're going to be confronted with having to pay for the television and radio licence and so on, which is over £100. I will be voting against this too.
Thank you, Chair. I've got some serious reservations about this. Last week I was sitting on an Adult Social Care and Health Scrutiny Committee in Stockport, and we were talking about, with health care professionals, about the development of area-based specialist centres. Fantastic in terms of healthcare provision for specialist conditions, but it has to go hand in hand with transport access. And one of the major groups of users of these centres are likely to be older people. And unless they can access their specialist hospitals, they won't be taking up their appointments. And in Stockport in particular, although it has an image of being a very nice leafy Cheshire suburb with people like Paul Pogba living on the doorstep, it also has some areas of high deprivation, and those are the people who have a shorter life expectancy, who have poorer quality of health during their lives and are less likely to take up this opportunity to have an enhanced pass. So I think it is problematic on those grounds and somewhat contrary to some of the developments taking place and being discussed in health circles. The other aspect of it is, as you just mentioned there, Councillor Gunter, without access to public transport, some older people will become isolated, and that isolation will lead to mental health problems. And again, we know that that's a service that is becoming into crisis, and I don't think we should be looking at anything that increases isolation and the risk of mental health. There are also young people who depend on transport in order to get to jobs and to access leisure. And I do really think that we need to be very careful about increasing any costs. And I have to say, as a WASPy woman, I don't have any free concessionary transport anywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wonder if any consideration had been, if you're going to charge someone £10, what you're giving them back, rather than take it away, then remove the 9:30 concession start. I just wonder if that had been considered. Then some of our old age pensioners, me included, can travel, coming to these meetings at 10 o'clock in the morning without having to pay £2.80 from Bowker Vale. If it was and certain things like this. So, you know, if you're going to put a charge on, what are you giving me for the charge? I just wonder if that had been considered, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I see why people aren't keen, but when you look that it's costing £7.5 million to administer this scheme, that's all dead money, isn't it? Would it be possible to clarify what this actually means? Because we're sort of talking like if this is taken away that nobody will be able to go anywhere, and obviously we've still got a bus network. So I think it would be helpful to have information about how accessible some of these places that people are talking about, hospitals, central, pods for whatever it might be that people need to access, how good the bus service is, because we know the bus services have been slashed all over the place. So I think we need to be reassured that there is a viable alternative before we actually confirm this one way or another.
Yeah, first I want to clarify, an enhanced pass. At the moment, the pass provides for buses, Metrolink, trains, so I don't really understand what the enhancement is.
It's only the bus that's free, that's right. The tram and the train is an enhancement that Greater Manchester offers us. That's not what we're entitled to under the legislation.
Right, but we've already got it.
We've already been given that, yes.
So in terms of this report, it's not enhancing anything I've already got.
We're all enhanced already.
The other, we're already paying for it, primarily by a levy on Greater Manchester Council taxpayers, so we're already paying for this anyway. But it's paid for by the greater population. So to start targeting older people again, like the TV licence and all the rest of it, politically it's not a good idea. Personally, it doesn't make a lot of difference for £10 a year, but I can understand that there's a lot of older people where it will make a lot of difference. And if they have to get hospital appointments and pay £2, £4, whatever every time, purely because they haven't paid the £10 up front, it could be quite painful. Thank you.
Again,
Thank you. Of course, there are many older people for whom £10 is not a significant sum, and that's. But for many people, it really is, and I feel like we haven't got the information about how many people you expect who currently have a pass not to get one, which is the key issue. It seems to me that if we're looking at this strategically from a transport and environmental point of view, the two key things are here: getting cars off the road so that people prefer to use the bus because. And that's a financial benefit to Greater Manchester ultimately, as well as reducing congestion. It's also using unused capacity, isn't it, on Metrolink and stuff, because trams are not as busy during the day. So there isn't actually kind of a cost to those journeys. In all honesty, it's a sunk cost. Those trams are running anyway. But I think that. The key thing about this is it's the message that it sends to people about how much you think it's important to enable them to be mobile. And personally, I do think it's incredibly important to allow people to be mobile all over the conurbations. So I'm really not in favour of it at all. And if it's unavoidable, then I think that it should not be charged to people who get council tax support.
Right, thank you, Chair. It's already been said across there about are we going to get anything more enhanced? As far as I'm concerned, I'm happy with the free bus pass, providing the buses turn up. When I've been on this committee now from day one, and I think there was one committee meeting where I thought I wasn't going to get to, because I'd been waiting for a bus for over 50 minutes. They're supposed to be every 10 minutes. So I will not want to pay any extra for a service that's incompetent. They don't turn up, and when they turn up, they're overpacked, even with a disability. Sometimes I can't get to sit down because there's other people with disabilities already on the bus because it's overcrowded, and they're dirty. You can get on and they smell because they haven't been cleaned properly. Now, they want us to pay an extra £10 for something that's not even competent enough at the moment in regards to the buses. And I still have very great concerns about people that have hospital appointments early in the morning, and this does not send a message out to the pensioners in our country that work hard for us across Greater Manchester that we don't think any better of them.
Can I just put one final point and then invite you to respond? And that is my concern about the administration of this, because currently the pass, the 5-year pass, you're talking about here about an annual charge, and therefore we're talking about having to presumably reissue and administer a £10 charge. What is the administrative cost of recovering £10? Because my fear is that it may well be almost the sum total of £10. But your observations, please, on that.
Thank you. If I can just to completely clarify what the proposal entails, and then maybe try and respond to some of the specifics. So the proposal absolutely isn't to make any charge for those people who use their concessionary pass to travel by a bus. And I think the report sets it out, even if we thought that was a good idea, that the legislation doesn't enable us to do that. What we're talking about is to levy a £10 charge per year for those people who currently get, and taking the councillor's comments on board, probably slightly unclear. What we talk about by way of an enhancement is that the National Concessionary Scheme, which is for bus travel after 9:30, is a policy that was introduced across the country, across England and Wales, and we effectively administer that on behalf of central government. What Greater Manchester has done is enhanced that scheme, if you will, or it enables people who currently get the card to travel on train and tram. What this is saying is that in practice, that to the extent that people pay £10, that pass will be eligible on a tram or a train. To the extent that they don't, then it wouldn't. In terms of the costs, so to the extent it generates 1.25 million, what we've included within the report is the proposal that that funding would be ring-fenced for bus services. So I know a couple of members mentioned bus, so that the proposal, and Kevin maybe wished to say some more around it, is that the funding that was raised would go towards bus services, which would be an extra, assuming the numbers of take-up are what we forecast, would be an extra 1.2 million, roughly, on top of the current subsidised services bus budget that's round about £27 million, that again members will be aware has been significantly under pressure for a number of years. So this would be incremental funding into bus. In terms of how many people might get one, again, difficult to forecast. There are a number of people who clearly haven't got access to Metrolink for purely practical reasons because of where they live, and there are a number of people who choose to use the bus over tram or train anyway for various reasons. In terms of the cost of it, the 7.5 million, we effectively apply a charge in the same way that we do for bus on the basis of sort of equity, for want of a better expression, across the various modes of transport. So to the extent that we reimburse bus operators for the trips that are made by concessionaires, be the elderly or children or disabled passengers, we make a similar charge, if you like, to Metrolink, and we make a similar payment to the rail operators for tram and for train as well. I think that the councillor, sorry, I apologise, I haven't brought my glasses with me, so I can only see the names of councillors that are near Councillor Mobbs. In terms of the WASPI, you be aware, I'm sure, that there is a scheme that was launched a bit over a year ago now for we haven't called it the WASPI scheme, but that's what it's known as colloquially. So to the extent that you haven't got a pass for that, more than happy to talk to you later and make sure that if to the extent you're eligible for one, that you can get one. It isn't all WASPI, you know, there are certain WASPI women. Yeah.
And could be a lot more targeted is what the money's going to be used for. So let's make sure that it doesn't just say for general bus services. Let's say that it says, because we spend millions every year on enhancing bus stops, bus stations, a million other things within this conurbation that are targeted at elderly people and people with walking difficulties. So let's be very specific and say that that's what that money would be targeted at. At least then we've said something positive, because if this paper instead of this was about introducing this service across our rail and tram network, we'd all be jumping for joy and saying, I'll have it. Tenner, it's an absolute bargain. But because we've always done it this way round, it'll be seen as taking away a service. So I just think that we have to be clear on making a case about what added value there will be to that group of people. And it just seems like common sense to me. I mean, part of the reality is that we're still despite what you would, despite a certain bidding war that's going on at the moment in the papers for a particular election, where we're spending everything that we've ever had and ever stopped off anybody, the truth is that in local authority terms, we're all short of cash, and it's biting more. And certainly I've guessed most of us are school governors. And the cuts in schools are biting more and more. So this is, I think, part of the deal that has to be talked about here.
Can I bring your comments to
Yeah.
We need to move on with other speakers. I did have Councillor Billington next on the list, but he's just walked out. So, Councillor Dutton.
I just wonder if the officer could answer the first question. Was it considered to remove the 9:30 start for concessionary travel?
Not specifically, no.
May I come back, Chair? Obviously, if you're talking enhancement and you want to raise 1.25 million, then remove the 9:30 start, because some of our old age pensioners at this moment in time are still in work on very poor salaries, 0-hour contracts, having to pay to get to work, but they get free travel coming home. The way to do it for me, if you want to raise this money so desperately, which is a pittance in a bigger picture of things, then give the old age pensioners something back, and then you'll be hitting quite a large array, I would suggest, of old age pensioners who'll be able to travel at 8 o'clock to get to places of work.
Just taking up that point, you say it's a national standard. I don't think it is. I think in London you can travel all day because I know my sister-in-law. Yeah. So there's no 9:30 start in London. It's and you can use it on the tube and whatever.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I appreciate you allowing me to speak this evening. Just to answer Councillor Gunther's point on that, that is an enhancement in London that's paid for by Transport for London. So the National Concessionary Scheme stipulates 9:30 start. It is an off-peak scheme. What we have in Greater Manchester is an enhancement on that national scheme that applies to bus, where we've enhanced it to include tram and train as well. And just to be absolutely clear with members, that we are not talking about any charge at all for bus usage. That remains completely free through this whole scheme. The additional £10 that we're asking for is for those older people who wish to enhance that bus opportunity to be able to use the Metrolink and the trains. I think we just need to be clear about that, because it is not going to inhibit many of our older people in terms of issues around isolation or hospital appointments, unless they already use the tram or train in particular to get there, because they will still be able to use the bus services. And I think it's important as well to note that the report is very clear that the money that is raised through this particular scheme is to go back into bus reform. So where some councillors have commented about the poor standard of buses, actually, because we can't charge, as it were, for that concessionary scheme for buses, this gives us an ability to charge for the enhancement, and that money can actually go back into bus reform and therefore potential enhancement of the bus services as well. In terms of Councillor Walker's point, which is a good one about how precisely this money will be spent, well, first of all, the Combined Authority has to agree the scheme, and then that will go through the budget process for the Combined Authority, which will be set out to members and to the Combined Authority, which will then detail all the various budget headings and how the money is going to be spent. It's not possible to do that at this stage of the cycle, because first of all we need to reach agreement. As Steve has said, we also need to know what numbers of people potentially take this up, so how much money will potentially be raised, but that will then go into the budget cycle process, so committee members will all be cited on that when it comes through.
Views on the matter which have been noted. Is it your wish that those comments now be attached to the report? Councillor Robinson?
I'd like my comments noted that I am against this totally.
a number of members expressed that view, and that will be included. Members happy that that is a response that we send back? And Councillor Walker's point about more detail of the enhancements.
Someone else asked, but I didn't hear a reply. But how much? Because clearly your bus pass lasts for 4 or 5 years. So someone asked how much that was going to cost. I think it was me. You're all right. Right, okay. Well, I couldn't remember who, but I thought it was a really important question, because if I find out that half the money is going to cover the admin, then it becomes a mockery, doesn't it?
Yeah, no,
What, I mean, it's £10 now, but what guarantee, what guarantee would there be that it would stay at £10? It could be enhanced and it could increase, and, you know.
yeah, so just in response to the how much will it cost, so again, members will be aware that the renewal of the passes is on a rolling basis. So it was first introduced, I was around, it was first introduced in 2008 when there was a sort of a big bang launch, and all eligible people applied for the pass, and we actually did get some money from central government at that time from memory to actually help us with the implementation. Subsequently, the passes are renewed on a rolling basis, albeit there's sort of rumps in some years beyond others. To the extent that the Combined Authority agrees that we proceed with this, our estimate is that the vast majority of additional costs can just be absorbed in what we're doing around renewing the passes. The practical reality is that there is, and I'm no technical expert, so apologies, there's effectively already a chip in, so those those members who've got a card, they are already smart enabled. So if you travel on the tram at the moment, you tap on the validators, which I'm sure you all do, and tap out. All we do is effectively load a product on there that says Mr. or Mrs. or Miss X has paid £10. It then recognises it.
How are you going to charge the users that £10?
How practically are we going to charge them? In the same way that we currently charge those young people who pay the IGO card.
So
we can make that clearer.
What is the calculation of the cost benefit in terms of cost of collection against the benefit of receipt? Have you got that calculation?
I haven't got the detail, but I can assure you that the costs are marginal and the benefit is the 1.25 million based on a 30% take up. In terms of incrementally marginal. So we've got people who are processing cards, be it the IGO card, be it subsequently the OurPass card. What we're not suggesting is that we need a whole load of more people to do that. We need some system changes and business process changes. And what we're saying is that to the extent there is an additional cost, they will be covered by what we describe as a top slice of the first 3 months, to the extent we introduced it in January. From April 2020, there's no incremental cost beyond the fact that we've got people doing this already.
But yeah, but have you got the capacity already? Sorry, I'm sorry to labour this point, but it does concern me that you will have 150,000 or whatever the figure may be of people who decide to top up their card. Are you going to send me an invoice every year to pay my £10, to administer my £10 and send me my new card? And what is the cost of that process, of the reminder, the receipt, and the re-release of the card?
I haven't got a detailed breakdown of the cost, Councillor. However, and to be honest with you, nor can I recount the process in absolute detail, not least of all because we haven't worked through the detail of it. But it will be a simple process in the same way that those older people are currently applying for cards, and we've got a big population of people. An even bigger population now with the launch of OurPass, where people are paying £10 to access a card. So I am not expecting that there is any more cost beyond in the absolute margins. It'll just be absorbed within our current resources. What I couldn't describe to you now, but I'll more than happily come back, with somebody far more informed than I about the actual detail of that process.
Okay, thank
But
you.
I'm certainly not, what we are absolutely not saying is that it's 1.25 million less a number that we haven't described to you. We're not saying that.
Thank you. I'm going to take one final comment, then we need to draw this.
It's to follow on what your comments are, Chair, because now I've got an even further concern. It's bad enough sometimes that pensioners have to fill in a form to get their bus pass now. In future, they're going to have to give the bank details, and some pensioners don't deal with their own banking system. They have family members or carers that do that for them. So every year now, somebody's going to have to go to the bank or make sure that they've got a receipt for that £10. I think it's absolutely ridiculous. Some pensioners do not like people interfering in their personal life, especially their own banking systems. So they will not go forward and ask for this new pass. For the simple reason it's an invasion of their privacy because you'll need their bank details.
And then I'm going to draw this matter to a close.
Yes, sorry, just to reassure the councillor in relation to the last point, that we are clearly acutely aware of and having undertaken the equalities impact assessment that we've done. What we're not saying at the moment is that somebody will need to give us the bank details. There'll be various means of people paying, whether it be through travel shops, whether it be through cheques or various other means. So what we're not saying is that we're absolutely not saying, because we couldn't say it anyway because of GDPR regulations, that people will be giving us the bank account details. Even if we wanted them to do that, we wouldn't. But I think we can certainly bring back, and I can bring back colleagues who can go through in some detail the process that we'd go through in terms of engaging your constituents.
Thank you very much indeed. I think we've given it a thorough airing now. I think concerns have been articulated and those points will be made. There was one final point I would make from the Chair, that I do think the report is deficient in terms of that detail as to the administration and the methodology on that. And I think without that, it is virtually impossible to pass a considered opinion other than to articulate the concerns that have been set forward this evening. Members happy that that is the response that we will provide? Thank you.
Chair, could I just make one comment?
Go on. I will be very... this evening, I'm very easy with you. I'll give you another opportunity. Go on.
Thank you, Chair. Just really just in response to what you said, what we're saying is that to the extent that the Combined Authority approved the proposal, then what we will absolutely need to do is to work up a detailed delivery plan that will take into account a lot of comments and questions, all of which are extremely helpful from members.
No, sorry, Chair. A lot of our members around this table have not approved this. So where has it been approved already? And if that's the case, what on earth are you coming here for if it's already been done? As far as I'm concerned, I haven't approved anything.
Not approved it. This committee has noted the report and the comments that have been made will be added to that and sent forward with the of the scrutiny views. Okay, members clear about that? Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. We go back then to the agenda and to item 9. So Greater Manchester Strategy Implementation Plan Performance Update.
Thanks, Chair. I'll just do a very brief introduction because members have had this for quite a while. It is that we're ongoing to deliver our ambition. So last April, we agreed the 2-year implementation plan that's attached to set out all the targets and ambitions to be achieved by 2020. So the document that you've got covers the period for October 18 to March 19 of this year, with some milestones for delivery in the coming 6 and 12 months to October 2019 and March 2020. And it includes a RAG rating, as you'll see in the papers, on the likelihood of the actions being delivered by 2020. Sorry, it's bringing me to tears. Just in paragraph 2.2, it highlights that this report has gone across all 3 scrutiny committees, and the committees are asked to focus on the particular activities that fall under their remit. Conversation at the preparatory meeting on the work programme as to what might inform areas that you might want to scrutinise in more detail over the next year, and we've included those in the draft work programme elsewhere on the agenda. So it's for members to make comment, ask questions. We've got officers here, Anne Morgan and Steve Fife from Planning and Housing. We've got Steve Warrener from Transport. We'll do our best to cover low carbon, but Mark Atherton is to come to the next meeting to give people a presentation on the green agenda. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Observations? Councillor Shilton-Godwin.
I know we've been directed to priorities 4, 6 and 7, but I have comments on priority 5, and I definitely think they're within the remit of this committee, although I haven't got the terms of reference here, because it's to do with connectivity, that's to do with transport, and therefore it's very closely related to the carbon and clean air questions that are exercising us all enormously at the moment. So first of all I had a query on the dashboard, because it says here and it's on page 38, and in looking at the supporting indicators, that 55.3% of short journeys under 2 kilometres in Greater Manchester are completed by walking or cycling in 2015 to 2017. Now, that doesn't tally, and I am the active travel lead for Manchester, so I follow this extremely closely. That simply does not tally with my knowledge of what people do at all. My understanding of what people are doing is that they're in their cars for those journeys, largely. So I'm just asking if that can be reviewed, because I just think that's not right. And it bothers me that a figure that is so important isn't right. And then going into the detail again on priority 5 and I'm looking here at item 5.5, and because I've got these in black and white, I don't know what colour it is, but have commenced a significant investment and reform programme for cycling and walking. What I'd like to ask about is that my understanding is now that nominally all of the money that was first secured for the Challenge Fund, 1.6 billion, I think, 1.6, whatever it was, has now been allocated. There's not very many schemes actually on the ground, but there are quite a lot sort of being worked up, and that's understandable because it takes a long time for these things to come to fruition. But what I want to know is, are we already working on getting more money? Because because that money, in terms of the number of people and the footprint that Greater Manchester covers, is tiny. We know that that's right. We know we need 10 times as much. So those are my queries on that priority.
Thank you. I think Steve, you wanted to respond to that.
Yeah, just so on the first question, can I take that back? I've no reason to doubt whatsoever the veracity of the numbers. However, I haven't produced them myself, so I'd just like to go back and confirm. Around. Yeah, apologies. So I will confirm that. As I say, I'm not doubting, as I'm sure you're not, the veracity of them. I just need to go back and understand where they've come from. In terms of the cycling and walking programme, which I am far more familiar with, members will recall that Chris Boardman, as the Cycling and Walking Commissioner, set out his vision, the Made to Move strategy. That suggested that there was a need of something in the order of 1.6 billion over a period. What happened over a year ago now, March 2018 from memory, was that the funding that Greater Manchester received from the Transforming Cities Fund, 160 million of that was allocated to the first phase, if you like, maybe the wrong words, of that programme. So what we have done, working with colleagues in districts, is to request that the local authorities bring forward proposals, schemes, which they've done currently in 5 tranches, and that this is slightly out of date in that tranche 5 went through the combined authority in June. What we now have is a effectively over-programmed programme. So we've got schemes that have been given what we describe as programme entry, which is an assessment by our technical teams that says, yes, these schemes have got legs, they need some further work done on them to build up a business case. Where we are now is we've got schemes that want more than the 160 million. So in the absence currently of any other specific funding source, and I'll come back to that in a second, we're going through with local authorities to review the schemes, to ensure that the costings are as accurate as they can be, to work to see whether there's any other funding sources that are available. To the extent that there are, then great. To the extent that they're not, then at the very worst, we will have schemes to the value of 160 million of funding need and a list of other schemes that are ready to go, subject to there being further funding. And I know Chris Boardman and the other cycling and walking commissioners who've been appointed across the other mayoral combined authorities have made the point quite vociferously to government about the need for further funding. It's one of a number of things. Members will be aware of the vision that the mayor set out, the Our Network vision, a week last Monday. That absolutely has active travel at the heart of it. In addition to a number of other transport asks, be it around bus, rail, and the like, and I would be not be in the slightest bit surprised if the comprehensive spending review submission that GM put in doesn't include a significant ask around transport more generally, cycling and walking, active travel being a key part of that. So I think the other comment that you made was around the number of schemes that are on the ground. You're right, these things, some of them are quite complicated schemes, quite big schemes actually. I, for one, was somewhat surprised when you see the value of some of these schemes, being a simple accountant, and they are complicated. I think there's at least one scheme that's delivered, a scheme in Rochdale, and there's a number of other schemes that are getting towards a final business case. And it's, you know, it's groundbreaking stuff and quite complex stuff. We've got a number of people, myself included, who've probably spent more time on this than we ever envisaged that we might. But again, something that if members would wish, we can certainly get somebody at a future meeting of this committee to come back and give a more detailed update on where that's up to. But there's regular reporting goes through to leaders of the combined authority roughly every couple of months.
Other members, any comments? Anything you wish to add to the report? Yes, Councillor Brownridge.
Thank you. Can I just ask a question about the housing provision and about infrastructure, which is shown as amber on our RAG rating? Now, obviously, we know through our consultations on GMSF that infrastructure is one of the things that gets people really, really excited, or the lack of it anyway. And I'm interested, it says here, influencing infrastructure providers. What does that actually mean?
Thank you, Councillor Brownridge. You are absolutely right that infrastructure is one of the biggest issues that come back to us every time. So we've had a lot of concerted activity over the last 12 months to look at infrastructure differently. We have established the Strategic Infrastructure Board, which has the infrastructure providers sitting on it, and I think the influencing is trying to work much more closely with them so that when they are putting together their investment programmes for the next 5 years and looking ahead the next 20 years, we know what they are and we're aligning them with our plans for growth or our issues where infrastructure may be particularly under pressure or at capacity. So the influencing it is difficult. It's a regulatory framework. It's hard to get into that, but I think we have got a willingness, particularly with the electricity and water providers, to work more closely, if we can, to align their investment programmes with ours. We are also looking to provide, to produce an infrastructure strategy with them, an action plan that starts to set out some of the actions that we are hoping will be, would lead to a different way of providing infrastructure and trying to do it in a much more integrated way in the areas where we expect to see most change. But at the moment, we've got the infrastructure framework which sets out the challenges. The next bit is trying to say what we're going to do about them. Thank you.
That's a supplementary question. That's all very, that's really encouraging. I mean, seriously encouraging. I suppose the supplementary question is, what's the role of the actual developers of the housing in this? Because that's the strategic statutory bodies, that's fine. But where are we, or what influence or what pressure are we putting on house builders to actually put their hands in their pockets rather than denying their responsibility because they can't afford anything, not, you know. So they have a contribution to this as well, and then what influence are we bringing to bear on them, I suppose?
As part of the evidence base for the next spatial framework, we're doing a piece of work on viability, strategic viability in particular, which looks at how viable certain types of development are in certain places and what ability those sites have to provide infrastructure. You do this at a local level, you fight this when you get viability assessments on planning applications all of the time. The planning guidance changed last year and said we should do a viability assessment of the plan, and therefore you shouldn't need to do, or developers shouldn't need to do viability assessments at planning application stage, which could be very helpful. So if we can demonstrate there is viability on that site, it is much, much more difficult for the developer to say we shouldn't be providing anything towards roads or schools or health facilities. Obviously, the change came in last year. This is the first time we're doing it. We do have some really significant viability issues across the conurbation, as in Oldham, I'm sure you're aware. So that's a piece of work we're doing, and that will look really at our brownfield land supply, where we're looking through the spatial framework to allocate land in the green belt or outside of the urban area. We're doing some site-specific viability work, which will again look at what level of infrastructure those sites can support from the developer side, which sites we may need to look and say, do we have to have some fund, do we have to find some funding elsewhere? So I think we will be in a much better position. That is, as you can imagine, an enormous piece of work that we have only just started. We're hoping we'll have something to report sort of October time.
I wonder how we're going to monitor how progress is on those particular issues. And then a completely separate question, but only because it's been in the news recently, but this business that industrial units being converted into housing units without planning permission, and I've not particularly come across it in Greater Manchester, but clearly it's a big issue in London, and some of our areas are getting very pricey now. And I just wonder whether that's an issue that we need to be keeping at least a weather eye on, but maybe more than that. Maybe we're already getting issues on that. I don't know. We are. Are you?
I think probably Councillor Shilton-Godden has experience of this. Manchester, I think, has had pressure particularly on old office or maybe second-hand office stock for conversion to residential, and has been looking to put in place an Article 4 direction which takes permitted development rights away. So anybody wanting to do that would need to apply for planning permission. It doesn't mean you can automatically refuse planning permission, but you would have to apply for it. We didn't really see very much activity, the conversions, particularly offices to housing. I think that is starting to change a little bit. I think Trafford has seen quite a lot. I think Stockport is starting to see it. We clearly have concerns about that because in terms of the standard of accommodation that may result. It still does need building regs approval, but I think there is a concern around what those units are actually providing, what level of housing. I don't know whether Steve's had anything from housing colleagues, whether that's coming out of the other end yet, but we are seeing more of that. If you'd asked us this 2 years ago, we really, there was a Bruntwood scheme in Trafford. That was about it. It is starting to become more popular as values increase. There's not a lot we can do as the combined authority. It is very much a local responsibility, and I think Article 4 direction is quite a lot of work involved in doing it. But that is one of the ways that at least you can retain some control by at least people have to apply for planning permission.
Comments? Yes, Councillor Shilton.
Sorry, there was a couple of other things that I had noticed and asked about. One's, I can't remember where I found it now, but there's something on the electric, page 47, priority 7, about the transport strategy, and I just wondered how the EV charging infrastructure was progressing, because I know it did get delayed, and I wondered how many charging points there was supposed to be across the conurbation. I've not read it, and I did read somewhere that somebody was putting in about 80 in a vast swathe of the south of England, and I just thought, 80? That's not very ambitious. I've got some more questions on Homes Reach retrofit as well, but I don't know whether you want to take all the questions that are not related to each other together, or whether you want to take them separately. Okay.
Questions, and we'll deal with them.
Okay. So then my other question was about on homes retrofitting. If we are to meet our carbon reduction targets, then it's going to be absolutely essential that we have a proper programme for retrofitting people's homes, and it's a huge benefit to people because we've got an awful lot of people living in fuel poverty or living in homes that are cold and damp and not properly insulated, and also the cost of fuel is massively going up. I think it's 27% of the carbon emission in the whole conurbation comes from homes and buildings. So it's a really, really important issue. But it's a very difficult one to tackle because of the fragmented nature of who owns those homes or buildings and who occupies them. So therefore, there's often a split between who owns them and who pays the bills. My question is really that, therefore, this needs a really big programme of work to think about how that is addressed, because there are some massive opportunities actually for underemployed or underskilled people to really learn how to do this properly, because it's a very technical area. People think about just putting a few rolls of stuff in your roof, but actually that doesn't address the problem. Most heat loss is not through conduction; it's through convection. It needs detailed atomic, but every time that is bespoke. So we need a skilled workforce. Who's thinking about that? Who's putting that workforce together? Who's technically advising it? Because there's an opportunity here for us to provide people to do this all over the country. And they could be very good jobs.
Julie?
Chair, Councillor, just to answer you quickly, I can't answer you specifically on your second question, but we've got Mark Atherton from the CA coming to the next meeting to give a full presentation on the green agenda, but specifically including a paper on the retrofitting of properties and including the Warm Homes Fund. So we've noted down your specific questions, and we'll make sure he addresses them when he brings that paper back.
Sorry, do you want to come back, Steve?
Chair, I was just going to respond in relation to to the electric vehicles. So again, I think the paper that you have here is a paper that went to the Combined Authority in May from memory. In terms of the electric vehicle charging infrastructure, we are in the very final stages of a procurement exercise. Members may well recall that there is a fleet's the wrong word, I can't think of the right word, that there is a number of electric vehicle charging points already out that have been provided by the public sector. That dates back a good number of years. It was part of government funding under the Plugged in Places programme. We bid for some further funding under what's called the Clean Air Early Measures Fund, and the proposal is that we put a number of, and again I'm no technician, apologies, but a number of newer generation charging points out there, and also look at the charging points that are already out there. So the proposal is that we will probably end up entering into contract with the preferred supplier probably in August. We're in the final knock-ins of negotiation, so probably not say too much at the moment. But that is to roll out a further number of charging points, and clearly through the procurement process we'll attempt to maximise the value of the money that we got from central government. Less than 30 and more than 20, but double headers.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Two issues. One is around the 6.1 sites for housing. Sorry, I missed you. I did have to go out. Under that, there may be an issue on not just about the sustainable side of it. Some councils are in the opposition to other councils. For instance, Rochdale has been targeted by Serco because we have low rents and low affordable housing. Under this, we are looking to be the opposite. We need houses of bigger stature, higher quality, higher priced houses. And that's the only way we will build up our revenue for the borough, because it's one of the lowest at the moment, and that's why Serco target Rochdale to put asylum seekers and other people in our towns, and especially up the north. So I have mentioned this to Paul Dennett when he was signing off the launch that Monday. He's well aware of the problems that we have had on our end, and on that, and on the homelessness, as you're well aware, well the staff are, that I chair the Homeless Forum from Rochdale, and I've worked with Andy Burnham from day one on that. We have a couple of issues with regard to trying to allocate homes for homeless people, and it's because of the allocations policy. So what we're doing now in Rochdale, we're reviewing our allocations policy for the simple reason we're finding people in Band A that shouldn't be there, and people in Band C and D that should be in Band A. And I'm hoping at some time that once we get that clarification, our leader might take that to the GM executive. Okay.
Comment? Well, we're asked therefore to consider the progress in the achievement of the 2020 ambitions and targets, and to note and agree the updated implementation plan and performance dashboard. With the comments that have been made, is your wish that that be noted? Thank you. And I now find why it was that I jumped to 12 when it was really 11 earlier in the agenda, because item 10 doesn't exist. So we come then to item 10, which is the housing funding streams, and Steve Fife is here to present and comment thereon.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm intending to run through this just reasonably quickly, because the intention really is to give you a kind of overview of the funding that comes out of central government and into various things housing related. So I'll run through it, and obviously happy to take questions at the end. There is a kind of question as to how much detail you would really be interested in this. There are lots of little funding streams, but I've focused on the main ones that are relevant to us, and particularly on the ones that are connected to or aimed at supporting new housing delivery, or perhaps indirectly through new sales to support new housing delivery. In saying that, I guess I should mention first off that the largest sort of single pot, if you like, it goes through housing benefit or universal credit or local housing allowance, which for the national total is around 24 billion per annum, which goes through as a subsidy through that route. So if you bear that sort of number in mind when you look at the numbers that relate to the programmes that I'm going through. I'm using national numbers mainly because they're the ones that are clearest, that are easiest to be sure are accurate. and I'll explain that as I go through. So the first one, and I've ordered these mainly down by size. So the biggest sort of funding that goes into housing markets from government is actually through Help to Buy, and there's various elements of Help to Buy which are detailed on the slide. But there's around 32 billion has gone or will go into Help to Buy over the 10 years since it was set up in 2013. We in GM or you in districts have no control, no influence over that because they're entirely demand-led. So individual households will be applying for Help to Buy equity loans or saving through the Help to Buy ISA scheme, which is now the Lifetime ISA scheme. But the government is putting significant funds through those routes. That 32 billion there is... The logic behind that is to help people to get into home ownership, and that's you know, a widely shared objective across the piece. But it's not strategic in any kind of spatial sense. There's nothing that we can do geographically to increase the amount of that funding that's flowing into Greater Manchester, other than by increasing the price of our houses, which probably isn't something that we want to be doing. But we know that there are significant funds coming in. So through the Help to Buy equity loan, we know there are about over 7,000 loans have come into GM over the last 5 years. Value of that about 275 million. So significant sums of cash coming in to Greater Manchester through that route. Second one, which is a very different one, and is the successor to a series of funding programs have been going for a very long time. In my day, it used to be called the All Affordable Development Programme of the Housing Corporation, but it's now the Shared Ownership and Affordable Homes Programme. Really rolls off the tongue, which is run nationally, 11 billion in the current sort of 6-year time slot. And that's the funding that is probably familiar to most of you. That's the grant that housing associations and other social housing providers, including local authorities, where you're still a registered housing provider, can access to support new build and in some cases conversions, so that to deliver affordable homes of various kinds, and that's one of the issues that members might want to think about. The products that are covered under that programme now include affordable rent, which is set at around 80% of market rent. It includes shared ownership. It includes rent to buy products. It does now again include funding for social rent, which it hadn't for a while. There's now 2 billion nationally available for social rent grant-funded schemes. However, if you look at that last bullet point, there's a little catch for 5 of GM districts which aren't eligible for that specific element of it. So all 10 districts are eligible for accessing the affordable rent, the shared ownership and so on, but only 5 which are judged according to a formula to have the highest affordability pressures are eligible to receive grant for social rented schemes. And that judgment is based on the gap between sort of affordable rents and private sector rents, which need to be more than £50 per week to qualify according to the formula. So the 5 where that social rent funding is available are Bury, Manchester, Salford, Stockport and Trafford. So that is undoubtedly a restriction and something that we have made representations to government about. The point above that around strategic partnerships is an interesting development recently. That allows specific housing providers who've entered into a sort of longer-term relationship with Homes England to get longer-term funding. And that's actually quite helpful to them in terms of negotiating on sites, putting build programs together, that they're not left in what has traditionally been a sort of 3-year cycle of funding. Those are now extending out to 2024 and again to 2029 in the relatively near future. So that allows those associations a bit more flexibility in terms of how they're building their future programmes of new development. In and around Greater Manchester, Great Places Housing Group, will be familiar to many of you, have a strategic partnership relationship which they're looking to extend to involve a few other Greater Manchester housing providers. L&Q, who are now in the process of taking over Trafford Housing Trust, also are one of those strategic partners. So that gives them potentially additional funding and easier access, if you like, to funding from Homes England, which is useful to us. Third on the list is the Housing Infrastructure Fund. That's 5.5 billion nationally. It was announced in 2016 and has been through an application process, so it was a kind of one-off opportunity, if you like, to put bids in. Under two headings. One, the larger schemes, the forward funding as it was termed, which is run in part through the combined authorities, including GM, and then the Marginal Viability Fund, which is for smaller schemes, but that was directly applied by districts direct to Homes England. We were actually reasonably successful. If you compare us to other northern kind of city regions, if you like, we did pretty well in that bidding process. The marginal viability schemes, around 69 million, sorry, across 1, 2, 3, 4, I think 7 districts. The bigger schemes, the forward funding schemes, there were 3 successful in the initial stage, and they're still going through due diligence processes with Homes England at the next kind of state level of detail. So we're awaiting announcements, which we believe will be in the autumn, about hopefully those being finally confirmed. So that's a scheme, a joint scheme between Bolton and Wigan, and 2 schemes, one in Manchester, one in Salford. So they're kind of work underway, if you like. What we don't know yet is whether that Housing Infrastructure Fund will be extended or repeated, that opportunity. That's been very important to us because it gives us an opportunity to bid for, as the name suggests, physical infrastructure that will help us to unlock house building, and that funding has been sort of hard to come by in recent years. So we would like to see that repeated, if at all possible. Number 4, the Home Building Fund is a big national programme. I won't talk about it for very long because there's the GM Housing Investment Loan Fund, which effectively does the same job. The national fund was set up after the GM one, so we like to think that was them learning from Greater Manchester. But it is still accessible to projects in Greater Manchester, so it's potentially a backstop there where the GM fund, for whatever reason, couldn't invest in a specific scheme. But it's probably less relevant to us than it is elsewhere in the country. So I'll run straight on to the next 2, and these are slightly mysterious, if I'm being honest. These are relatively recent programmes. The Small Sites Fund, it's 750 million nationally from last year, and the Land Assembly Fund, 1.3 billion. The Land Assembly Fund is basically funding for Homes England themselves to acquire land that needs some investment to bring it ready to the market. We've got quite a good relationship with Homes England locally in GM. They work in a lot of detail with us on a lot of schemes with district colleagues. So that to us seems like a positive development. I'm not sure how far 1.3 billion will stretch across the whole of England, but we'll certainly do our best to make the best use of that one. The Small Sites Fund, again, seems like a good idea. It's open to business, and I'm sure colleagues in districts will be talking to Homes England about opportunities we have to use that. We'll see how that goes. I think that's one of those funds that probably government will extend if it seems to be producing positive results. So we're hopeful on that one. And then Estates Regeneration Fund, this is an interesting one which kind of illustrates some of the problems that we have in accessing funding in Greater Manchester. So this grew out of largely London-based experience where local authorities or housing associations were increasing the density of social housing estates, maybe putting a lot of market sale units on, using the values that you can generate in London to increase housing supply, diversify. Some issues around whether they were returning the amount of affordable and social housing that perhaps was in the schemes originally. But it's a model that's very much built on using the value in the land that's in and around social housing estates. Clearly, in the Greater Manchester or Northern context, that's quite a hard sum to make add up. The main stream of funding under that programme is loan finance, so it's dependent on the schemes that come forward actually in effect paying for themselves in the long term, and that's a huge challenge in most of Greater Manchester. We have accessed some of the revenue funding that came along with it to sort of do some initial preparatory work and try to work through what the potential for regeneration in specific estates has been. But it then leads us to look at other funding sources as the way to probably take those forward. So an illustration maybe of the kind of national programmes perhaps not hitting the approaches that we would want to see in Greater Manchester. So Before I go on to talk about the geographical issue more generally, a couple of other things to be aware of. There's a smaller fund, the Care and Support Specialised Housing Fund, or CASH for short, which is aimed at encouraging housing associations to develop specialised housing, supported housing. In conjunction with health and social care colleagues, we've been pushing associations to make some progress on that. That was rather stalled by changes to housing benefit rules sort of 3 or 4 years ago. That issue has now been resolved, so we're not quite seeing the kind of acceleration of delivery of those schemes that we would have hoped would have come when that issue was resolved. So perhaps something to look out for locally if there are schemes, perhaps supported housing schemes for older households, but also for others with specialised housing needs. There is funding around for that, and Homes England colleagues are quite keen that we make use of that. And there's also another fund, Community Housing Fund, which is available at the moment for community-led housing, so housing cooperatives, other models of community-led housing. We are doing some work to try and set up an advisory hub for community housing groups within GM. And there's another little bit of money that we're trying to bid to help us put that together in terms of the capacity that requires, because we haven't got an expert in community housing within the CA. But I'll take you on to, and I'm not sure why the headings are suddenly smaller there, but an issue that there was an announcement made at the areas of highest affordability pressure. So not entirely. So the formula they're using is that 80% of the funds under these programmes will be targeted at areas with those highest affordability pressures. There's only 4 local authority areas in the north of England as a whole who qualify for that. So we've got one, we've got Trafford. The others are South Lakeland and Hamilton Harrogate in Yorkshire. So what that means effectively is that the 20% that's left is available to the 9 remaining GM authorities to bid for and under those programmes. So the bigger schemes under Housing Infrastructure Fund, the State's Regeneration Fund that I was just talking about, Home Building Fund, which again we've got the GM fund, so maybe that's not so much of an issue for us, and then the new ones, the Small Sites Fund and the Land Assembly Fund. So if you put that on a map, this is what it looks like. The blue areas are the ones that are in the 20%, and the red are the ones that are in the 80%. We've called that a heat map to show where the funding is concentrated. And actually, yes, there is the north-south divide there, but some surprising perhaps places in the south as well, places like Plymouth and Southampton that don't fall into the 80% nationally. So that is an issue for us. That's something that we've written to the Minister about, and I know Paul Dennett and others have made representations about this. It's still in the rules of the game as far as Homes England colleagues are consider it at the moment. There is a feeling that actually for many of those programmes that 2080 balance is probably not that far from what the allocations were actually turning out to be. But we'll need to see how that plays out over time as we go through. So finishing with the best for last, if you like, in terms of this is the funding that we control here in Greater Manchester, the Housing Investment Loan Fund. We've got that through one of the devolution deals. We've got a 10-year, 300 million fund which we revolve around. It's available for schemes that are led by the private sector. And it's money that we're lending and intending to get paid back. And when it's paid back, we can reinvest it and recycle it. So we're aiming to get it round 2.5, maybe 3 times if we can within the 10-year period. And it's also generating some surpluses now, which we can retain and we can use to support our own housing objectives. So the conditions for the funding are sort of there. If you want more detail, Andrew McIntosh, I think, is due to come and talk to the committee at a future meeting, who's the guy who's running that scheme, so he can give you chapter and verse, but it would be daft not to mention it, as it's the one that's most under our control. As you see at the bottom there, we've committed over 420 million of that because we're getting repayments back from the early schemes already. That will allow us to deliver more than 5,000, or allow private sector developers who are borrowing that funding to deliver over 5,000 units on 40 sites across Greater Manchester. So that's the quick run through. In terms of next steps for us, Homes England issued a new strategic plan last year for the period up to 2023. That talks about working with what they call priority areas to support housing delivery. They are very clear that Greater Manchester to them is one of those priority areas. So we're in an ongoing dialogue as to how we can translate that kind of sentiment into some useful flexibilities and investment and encouragement to housing delivery in Greater Manchester. But those conversations are ongoing but positive, I'd say, at the moment.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of things, please, sir. The Small Sites Fund and the Land Assembly Fund, and if I'm wrong, correct me. Would this help in a way we're trying to build on brownfield sites rather than greenfield sites, to build up our quota in each council? Would this sort of funding help get onto these sites that nobody else wants, to take this piece of land and work it to 4 homes so it can add to our quota? And if that's the case, how do we get into it? What's the criteria for the applications for these 2 particular funding streams? That's that one. And on the other one, the 150 units at 40 sites, I haven't got a clue where they are. Are we entitled to know where they are, please?
Chair, if I might, yes. On the Small Sites Fund and the Land Assembly Fund, I think the answer to the question is yes. To me, particularly the key word grant funding on the Small Sites Fund particularly means it should be helping us bring forward some of those smaller, and we do have lots and lots of smaller brownfield sites around Greater Manchester. The way to access it is to get your officers to speak to Homes England if they aren't already, to see what the processes are. It is open. It is there to fund schemes that can spend by March 2021, which isn't actually that far away. So that might be one of the ways of picking which sites you might want to push through that route, because that's quite a short time scale for all things housing. Sorry, and on your second point, yes. Yes, we can get you a list. The schemes are approved by the Combined Authority at the public meetings, so if you're very painstaking, you can go through all the CE meeting papers, but I won't make you do that. We'll get a list to you. We'll share the list.
Can I come on the back of that then? 'Cause once they're sorted, will you be starting another list?
Colleagues are always looking for more schemes to fund.
Thank you, Chair. The Greater Manchester Housing Investment Loan Fund, the 300 million, is that for affordable schemes only in Greater Manchester? I know the GMCA doesn't have a definition of affordability, if I'm right. We would consider it 8% of the market rate in Manchester, but is that for what one would consider affordable, or could Fred Dunn, for example, put in an application for some money? Yeah, thank you.
No, it's not pointed at affordable housing schemes specifically. The way it operates is the intention is to speed up, to accelerate housing delivery in general. The affordable housing elements of it, and it is a question that we ask every time, is determined largely by the district that the scheme is in. So the schemes need to conform with, or ideally exceed, the affordable home requirement that the local authority involved would put on the scheme. We're there to fund it and to accelerate housing delivery, but rest assured that is a question that we ask for every scheme. And if we don't ask it, the portfolio holder asks it.
Further comments, questions on the report? We're not quorate, so all we can do is note the report at this point. Okay, we move then to next item, which is the work programme. And you have a draft with the papers. If you want to speak to it, please, Joanne.
Thanks, Chair. Following on from the informal briefing session that we had last time, we took on board member suggestions and we've populated a draft work programme for the year 1920. Obviously, the issues are the same, but the timings of them may change due to people being able to attend, etc., and reports going via the CA and the timetable there. Just to note, on the one in front of you, you have Town Centre Strategy and Mayoral Development Corporation down for September. We've actually confirmed that the Mayor's able to attend in November, so that one will be moved to November. And also a few of the things that have been mentioned tonight, retrofitting, we have down. Also, including the green agenda in the town centre, in the retrofit. So basically it's for members to have a look through and see if there's anything on there that they want to add or delete or comment on, basically, Chair.
Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. I think the one about the bed every night being in January, I think we need one before then. Now that Andy's decided it's going to be run from July to July for the next 12 months, that he's put the funding forward for that, I think we need an interim report on that halfway through the year, so it needs to be before January.
Maybe, Chair, we might be able to fit it into the November meeting then, because obviously the Mayor's able to attend then, so we'll see what we can do. Thanks, Chair.
Fairly fluid, and there will be changes as the year goes on. But if there are additional items that members feel strongly we ought to consider, if you let the officers know, and we will look at the programme. As we've seen tonight, there are items which disappear from the programme at short notice because of non-availability of officers, so we just need to have some schemes in reserve, some proposals. So please bring your comments forward. Item 13, the dates of future meetings. We have had a discussion on that, and therefore I suggest that they remain extant, and we will consider changes during the year if necessary. But for the time being, those are the substantive dates. And that being the whole of business, can I thank you for your attendance and declare the meeting closed.